Hello and welcome to Talking Aussie Books, a weekly podcast bringing readers and writers of Australian fiction together. I'm Claudine Tinellis. As an avid reader and passionate advocate for Australian fiction, I make it my mission to spotlight local talent. So if you're looking for your next read or simply want to learn more about the Australian literary scene, this podcast is for you. Grab yourself a cuppa, sit back and relax. And before I welcome my next guest, I'm proud to announce this episode is brought to you by Writing New South Wales, a Talking Aussie Books partner for 2022. Writing New South Wales is the peak body for writers and writing in New South Wales. They aim to support writers by helping them navigate the publishing industry and build long-lasting careers. Writing New South Wales aims to promote a vibrant and diverse writing culture through courses and events by providing information and advocacy along with networking opportunities. To find out more about this wonderful organisation, you can visit writingnewsouthwales.org.au. Better still, avoid missing out on important industry information, course enrolments and other opportunities by signing up to Newsbite, the Writing New South Wales weekly e-newsletter. Toni Jordan is a best-selling, award-winning Melbourne-based author of 6 novels. Her debut novel, Edition, was an international best-selling novel which was also shortlisted for the highly prestigious Miles Franklin Award. Toni's new novel, Dinner with the Schnabels, was recently released by Hachette, and listeners, whilst it was the first of Toni's novels I've read, it certainly won't be the last. A delightfully humorous and insightful look at marriage, love and family, I galloped through Dinner with the Schnabels, and I'm thrilled to have the opportunity to chat with Toni about it on the podcast this morning. Welcome, Toni.
Thank you, Claudine.
It's so wonderful to have you. And I wanted to say congratulations on this new novel.
Thank you so much.
It's been a while, hasn't it?
It has been a while. I've had a little break. It's good to have a little break, but yeah, it's good to be back as well.
Indeed. Now, it might be bad taste to say that I enjoyed reading about Simon and his struggles. Perhaps it's better if I say that I appreciated gaining insight into the struggles that he and his family faced in the wake of his business going under and how he came to terms with what had happened. So I wondered, Toni, then if you could tell me a little bit about the story and what inspired you to write it.
Well, I think it really came out of 2020, Claudine, to tell you honestly. Nobody had a good year really in 2020, and I was really watching a lot more television than I would have otherwise watched, and I really found myself drawn to, shows like Ted Lasso and Schitt's Creek, and those kind of, heartwarming sounds like a sledge, like it's something wrong with being heartwarming. But I really, with everything going on in the world, I just wanted something that was about the good in the world, if you know what I mean. So I started to think about the book and what I wanted to say about it. So I was trying to capture that vibe. I wanted to have a man who, as you say, was down on his luck. Simon has lost his business in the lockdowns and is not having a very good time. And he's surrounded by these people, the Schnabels, his in-laws, and he's trying his best, but poor Simon doesn't really quite get it. Basically, his in-laws give him a job to do. He has 1 week to make a garden in the backyard of his wife's best friend, and circumstances conspire against him, but he also conspires against himself. So, we get to see if he can manage it.
It was a really terrific insight into the psyche of somebody who'd been through quite a traumatic event in his life, I think. It really was. Now, the Schnabels, who are, as you say, Simon's in-laws, are not the easiest people to get along with. Well, not for Simon anyway. The relationship his wife Tansy enjoys with her family, her siblings in particular, isn't something Simon understands, is it?
No. So he's an only child with kind of distant parents, and this idea of everybody being in everybody's pocket and ringing all the time and coming around and kind of, having their 2 cents say about everybody else's business. He finds it quite surprising. He's grateful for it in a funny way because Simon and Tansy have 2 children of their own, and he likes the idea that those children will always have someone there for them. But yeah, it's all a bit bemusing, and he doesn't quite know how to handle them.
He's a particularly flawed character, I think. I mean,
I love that he's a flawed character. And it's very interesting to me that often I get these very few from readers, actually, mostly from people in the publishing industry who say things like, can't you write more likable people? And I kind of think, oh, it's the flawed people I find so fascinating. I mean, they're the ones that I want to see why they're like this and what could possibly be going on in their heads, and what, what is happening behind the scenes. But anyway, I interrupted your question. What were you going to say?
Not at all. Not at all. I think that's fascinating. Look, there's a lot to be said about the unlikable character. And I think, like you, they make the more interesting subject for sure. But in relation to Simon, yes, he is a flawed character, and he's wallowing in self-pity after the failure of his business. And he seems to have a great deal of trouble motivating himself to do anything very much. In fact, I would go so far as to say he was severely depressed.
Yeah,
He viewed everything around him through this lens of failure, didn't he?
Yeah, absolutely. And, this is the kind of reason, this is another one of the reasons why I love characters like this, because of the differing responses you get from people. Like, everyone has been really generous about this book. All the readers who've spoken to me have told me how much, they loved it and etc. But some of them say, oh my God, Simon is so annoying. I just about wanted to kill him by halfway through. And other people say to me, it's so obvious that he's in the middle of a major depressive incident. Why is nobody helping him more? So just those varying responses, the nuance of writing a character, where is he like this? Is he like this? Some of the book club discussions that people have told me about have been, very illuminating about the way readers think and about their lives, about their priorities and their personal experiences with depression and how it strikes people. So, that's the beauty of writing a character that's kind of shades of grey instead of black or white.
And I think what I particularly loved about this book, Toni, is that you haven't shied away from talking about the lingering effects of COVID, the financial fallout for those who lost work or businesses, and the psychological impact that had on many people. None more so than the people of Melbourne who endured multiple lockdowns and some of the toughest restrictions in the country. And I know that many writers have avoided dealing with this in their writing. So on that basis, I'm really interested to understand if this was something you were concerned about when you were writing Dinner with the Schnabels, or were you keen to explore post-pandemic issues?
Well, Claudine, it was actually a big decision. I had a lot of chats with my friend, my novelist buddies, and a few of them said, that's it, I'm writing my next novel set in the 70s. I just refuse to engage. I give you a psychic prediction now. For the next 2 years, you're going to see a lot of historical fiction. It's just going to dominate. I just kind of felt that because I was writing it in 2020, if I did it carefully, I thought I had an opportunity to capture a particular moment in time and make it something that spoke to how we were all feeling. So that took a couple of things. It took work, obviously. I went back and I knew it would be coming out early this year. So I went back and looked at the 1917 Spanish flu epidemic, how long that lasted, how people's behavior changed through the course of it. And I also, kept up to date. My wonderful editor, Emma, and I would do periodic kind of peels through the manuscript to check that, there was nothing that was going to be jarringly wrong, because all it would have taken was some new rule or some new lockdown and it no longer would have worked. But I was also very lucky that everything kind of rolled out as I would imagine it rolling out. But at the same time, I didn't want to talk about it. I didn't want to mention the pandemic. I didn't want to talk about it at all. This was going to be purely and simply about recovery, about how people put their lives together.
Yeah, it's so fascinating to me because, interestingly, that's something I'm exploring in my current manuscript. And I think when we were in the grips of the pandemic, a lot of writers were asking that question, is that something that we're going to be writing about in the future, or is it something that, will date our work? And a lot of people want to move past it. They don't want to dwell on it. Yeah, it was so interesting to me that you took the bull by the horns with this novel and you squarely dealt with not so much, the actual the
oh yeah, so that was important that I didn't mention any of the details. I don't want to go through the details again, and I'm sure nobody else does. But you don't have to, because it's also fresh in our minds. So all I have to say is, there's a mask in the bottom of Tansy's bag or something, and we all know. So it can be very light, but the repercussions can be very deep.
Indeed, they can. Now, I think I mentioned that you were from Melbourne, and I'm sure, like many other people, you witnessed firsthand the devastation wreaked upon businesses and families by the pandemic. But was there anything in particular that you needed to research in order to bring Simon's experiences to the page?
It was a pretty research light book, actually. I've written research heavy books before, Claudine. Like
Yeah.
I've written historical fiction and books that dealt with quite specific mental health disorders. But this was really about the empathy involved in getting into the mindset of a middle-aged man, which I'm not. I'm not a 42-year-old man, surprise. And to try, and I don't have any children, and I don't have brothers, and I live in Melbourne, and my whole family, it does not. I have no family here. So it was really about that active creative empathy that fiction is just so good at. Like, the whole beauty of fiction is that it forces you to see the world from the perspective of someone who's not you. You know, it forces you to think about what life is like for somebody who's different from you. And that's part of the experience for the reader, but it's also part of the experience for writers. It forces you to sit down and go, okay, if I was this person, how would I see the world?
So on that, I wanted to know if there was a particular reason you chose to write the story from Simon's point of view.
Interesting. I deliberately chose a male protagonist, and I've never written an entire novel. I've had, like, my novel 9 Days has 9 different first-person narrators, and a couple of those are blokes. But I've never done a whole novel from the point of view of a male before. There's a couple of things. The things that I was reading about that time were all male narrators, and I was kind of admiring that, again, that act of entering into somebody else's skin, somebody different from you. But I also kind of think that for me, myself, the lockdowns weren't difficult, right? I'm kind of an introverted person. I work at home by myself anyway. I don't have any children. My mum's passed away, and my mother-in-law's passed away, and my dog passed away.
Oh,
So
no.
it's all, I have really very little people to worry, very few people to worry about, and a job and a personality that lends itself to sitting inside and reading books, and that's fine. My husband, though, my darling husband, who is an outdoor social exercise person who loves people, who is very extroverted, found it really enormously difficult. And it was really challenging for him, watching him be challenged in ways that were not challenging for me was a really interesting kind of eye-opening experience about the way, we've been together for nearly 30 years, so we know each other pretty well and we know how each other operates pretty well. But seeing him so challenged by something that was very easy for me kind of opened my eyes a little bit about what life is like for him. And I kind of think that, of course, this is passing as it should, and it's ridiculous, but I kind of think that men do measure themselves more by the traditional markers of success than women probably do. And again, that's just a gross generalization, but mothers and other people, like, had I have chosen Tansy, Simon's wife, as the main character, I feel no doubt that she would have found strength in looking after her children and the social and community connections that she had. Whereas Simon, without his business, without his staff, without his clients, without the people that he met through business, he was a completely adrift. And that's the feeling I wanted to explore, that feeling of being adrift.
So back to the Schnabels for a moment. Not only does the arrival of Monica, Simon's new sister-in-law, wreak havoc in Simon's week, but it's also a momentous occasion for his wife and her siblings, not to mention the mother-in-law, Gloria. Moreover, they haven't been able to formally grieve the passing of their father 2 years earlier because of COVID restrictions. That was a very commonplace occurrence, wasn't it?
It was, yes. A lot of people that I spoke to lost people during that time. And, if the funeral was allowed, it was limited to 10 people or whatever.
Yeah.
And it didn't allow people to kind of grieve properly or move on properly.
Yes, absolutely. I think that was one of the most heartbreaking consequences of the pandemic, to be honest. Yeah. Speaking of the arrival of Monica, or Mon, as she was known throughout the novel, Simon's new sister-in-law, half-sister to Tansy, it comes at a particularly difficult time for Simon. He, as you say, has been volunteered to landscape this friend's backyard for the long overdue memorial service for his father-in-law. But given that he's basically spent the previous 2 years on the couch, unshaven and unemployed, it's a bit of an ask, isn't it?
It shouldn't be a bit of an ask. Like, he's more than capable.
Yeah.
It's just a mountain for him from where he is. And so, the trick is always to, how do you motivate yourself when you're feeling like that? I mean, it's not just as simple as getting up and doing it, because we all know, we've all either ourselves been in those situations where we know we have to do something, but we just cannot make ourselves do it.
Yeah.
Or we've known somebody like that. So, the idea that he has to, I want it to be a garden specifically, because, gardens have a very a deep sort of place as a metaphor about, seeds are about potential, and living things are about all the risks and rewards that come with living things, and the physical labor required in, like, a garden is the opposite of Simon, where he's been on the couch. So all those things, it's not just a physical challenge for him. He also has to deal with this idea of starting afresh, and the kind of insult to his ego about making this beautiful space for a family that's not his, a family who is living in this tiny little flat because he lost their house, basically. So, there's a lot of guilt and a lot of shame and a lot of stuff pressing down on him.
He has a week to do it, a week to get his act together, and the novel's events run over the course of that week. Did you always have it in your mind to do it this way?
Well, that was a bit of a later kind of addition, because what actually happened was, when I was thinking about it and when I was partway through, I thought, oh my God, this is the lowest stakes novel in the history of novels. Like, can this guy get the garden done? I mean, it's not really, can you defuse a nuclear bomb or something? Like, it's extremely low stakes. And I kind of thought to myself, how can I try and generate a bit of narrative energy from this, right? From this guy working out if he can make a garden or not. So I really just stole that kind of, I know you have a lot of writers who listen in to you, Claudine, and they will know that there's a common technique used in thrillers and those kind of books, adventure kind of, and thrillers, called a ticking clock, which is, not, you have to do something, save the world or whatever the thing is, and the time pressure is upon you. So I've stolen this technique from thrillers or kind of adventure novels, except it's not the most thrilling thing in the world. So I've tried to use the same technique as you would if it was defusing a bomb, except it's making a garden, just to try and keep the energy up. And I'm actually, I didn't know if it was going to work or not, but I'm actually really pleased. Like, people have been saying things, like texting me things like, oh my God, I'm up to Wednesday, he's done nothing yet, I want to get a ute and do it myself. Like, you're not feeling the pressure of it, which is great.
Indeed, and that was something that I absolutely felt, and I was worried for him and simultaneously annoyed by him. And I kind of wanted to give him a kick up the backside and say, get a move on, dude, because it's not going to be finished in time. Absolutely. And he was going to let everybody down if he didn't actually get it done.
That's made me so happy to hear that, Claudine. That's exactly what I wanted.
And I just thought it worked so incredibly well, and I wondered, therefore, whether it was something that you deliberately had chosen to do.
Yeah, I did. Spreading it out. I'm not really big on drafting. I like to make my ideas on the way through so I can fix it up, as I go. Yeah. But, I was 3 or so chapters in, and I thought, this is just, if I spread this over time, and the only thing is a garden, it's just not enough. I need to kind of rev this a bit. Otherwise it's not going to work. I need people to want to really keep reading. I love, the whole goal with plotting for me is this idea of unputdownable. Like, that's what I'm really aiming for. Yeah. And I think the tight time frame helped that.
Absolutely. It was brilliant. In many ways, I think Simon was an unreliable narrator. His perception of the events happening around him, where, as I said earlier, viewed through the lens of this depression and sense of failure. Was this deliberate or more about the way the story came about?
No, that was absolutely deliberate. I love an unreliable narrator.
Yeah.
And what I really love, which was when I realized I could do that in this book, that made me so happy, is the reader knows more than the narrator, than the protagonist. So he's not lying at any point. Like, he's genuinely telling you exactly what he thinks and exactly what he thinks is happening around him. Of course, it's absolutely not what's happening around him. He's wrong in so many ways.
Yeah.
And the reader, hopefully, I've done a little prologue, which I normally don't do, but the prologue was also about signaling that Simon has no idea what's going on. And the reader is hopefully always a step ahead of Simon, and that gap between what Simon knows, or his comprehension of the world, and what the reader is comprehending about the world. I just love that also. That's the kind of thing in stories that make me happy, because it means that the reader is not just sitting there sort of passively absorbing the story as it comes to them. It means that they're an integral part of how the story works.
Yeah, absolutely wonderful. I really enjoyed that part of the story. We haven't spoken much about Gloria, Simon's mother-in-law, but she was a particularly fabulous character, I felt. She was someone with a dramatic streak, but also brutally honest and uncompromising. So I wanted to ask you, Toni, was she inspired by anyone in particular?
Look, my mother was certainly not like that, but I have taken a couple of the lines that my mother would say and given them to Gloria, because my mother was also very combative. Like, she loved to argue. And whatever position you took, if you agreed with her, if you came around to her view in an argument, she would then take your position just so she could continue arguing with you. She was just a contrarian. Like, she just liked the opposite of whatever was the thing. So I have given a few of her kind of traits to Gloria, but they're very different characters. But one of the delights about Gloria was also watching her interactions with her 3 children and with Simon, because she's really a slightly different person with all of them. And I think often you do see that in families. You see the parents being slightly different versions of themselves, each of their children. And that's partly about gender, and it's partly about birth order, but it's also partly about the parents responding to what they think that child needs for them.
Yeah.
And the other delight is writing grown-up children who have never got over their childhood dynamics with each other. So that's really funny also to me, that people in their 30s and 40s are still behaving in the same kind of way they did when they were 10.
I would say, Toni, that despite Simon's trials and tribulations through this novel, Dinner with the Schnabels is ultimately an uplifting story. So I wanted to ask you, if there was one thing that you wanted readers to take away from this novel, what would it be?
Oh, that's such a good question. There's a saying in Stoic philosophy, which is, the obstacle is the way. Like, you can find good in things. You can deliberately make a decision to say, okay, what is the good parts of that? And it's very hard to do that when you're at your lowest ebb, and that's when you need other people maybe to help you do that. Like, if Simon had asked for help a lot earlier, he would have been in a better position, I think.
Toni, I know that you're going to be at the upcoming Sydney Writers' Festival. It must feel good to be able to get out once more to talk to readers and other people at such events, isn't it?
It's so great. And, talking to readers about this book and the frustration they feel with Simon, and how they're really, they entered into this journey with him as he tries to change his life over the course of a week. It's just been fantastic.
Toni, you've come to a career in writing after holding a range of eclectic positions. You were a molecular biologist, a quality control chemist, a TAB operator, and door-to-door aluminium siding salesperson. So I guess it begs the question, did you always want to be a writer?
Honestly, it had just never occurred to me. I mean, I was always a big reader at school, and I just inhaled novels my whole life, but I just always felt that, I knew they were written. Books were obviously written by somebody, but they weren't written by somebody like me. They weren't written by, someone from the suburbs in Brisbane. My parents were not big readers. They had no artistic kind of thing. We didn't have art or music in the house. It was I was the first person in the family to go to university from school. And it was just I thought people who wrote books were, I don't know, they lived in New York or they spoke French or they were my father was a greyhound trainer and mum had a TAV and we had greyhounds under the house, and people like me didn't write books. It just would have never occurred to me.
Oh, but look what's happened. So what's the best thing about writing novels, do you think?
I love everything about it. I love sitting down every day and making up stuff for a living. Like, I can't believe that this is my job, Claudine. I get to make up stuff for a living. I can't really, maybe it's because I did have a long working life before I started. Like, I worked for 20 years in full-time jobs before I started writing. So it's very easy for me to sit down every day at the same time and do the work. I'm not a procrastinator. I feel it's an enormous privilege. I think of all the very intelligent women in my family who had did not have the opportunity to have the kind of education that I've had. And I just feel like at the moment, I feel like I'm the luckiest person alive.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's so lovely to hear. Toni, and you mentioned before that many writers listen to this podcast, and given all of your experiences, both in the publishing sphere and outside, I wondered if you had tips to offer those aspiring authors out there.
I think something that I've learned over the part, I signed my contract for my first book in 2006. So 16 years, it took me 2 years to write that. So 18 years, I guess I've been doing this. And the really thing I've learned to value the most is the process. You can never tell how the book's going to turn out. I've published 6 novels and I've written another 2 that were not published, couldn't sell. So I've written 8 manuscripts, full-length manuscripts. And you never can tell if it's going to turn out at the end. Unless you're on a good contract, you can never tell if it's going to get published. If it's published, you can never control how it's going to be received. All those things are outside of your control. The only thing you can control is what you do every day when you sit down. So all I think about is the process. I divorce any of that other stuff from my brain. And I think, I expect a high word count from myself because I've been doing this for a long time.
Yeah.
But, I didn't when I was a beginner. But now I say to myself, my entire job today is 1,000 good words. If I can do 1,000 good words today, that's my job. I don't have to worry about anything else. I never know the end before I start. That's like the last thing I've figured out. Just 1,000 words and to enjoy it. I mean, there are so many different types of artistic pursuits that you can follow. You can do any kind of visual art. You can paint or you can draw, you can crochet, you can cook. Like, there's a million ways to fill that beautiful part of your brain and make art. It doesn't have to be writing. No one's making you. And if it truly is making your life painful, don't do it.
Yeah.
Like, find something that makes you happy.
Are you working on something else at the moment?
I have nearly finished. I haven't really brought myself to say goodbye to the Schnabels.
Yeah.
So I've actually written another one, which is about Kylie, the oldest sister, Tansy's oldest sister.
Oh, wow.
So
okay.
We'll get to see what her life is like and what it's like being Kylie inside her brain. So that's proving fun.
And will we hear a little bit more about Simon and Tansy and Kylie's story?
Everybody will pop in. That's right. Everybody will be there. I quite love those Marion Keyes Walsh sisters books, the 5 of them.
Me too.
So I kind of think now I'm going to just go around the whole family and see what life is like for all of them.
Toni, where can listeners find out more about you and your books?
I have a website, tonijordan.com, and I have an author page on Facebook. So you can search for me on Facebook and I'll pop up. I'm doing a few festivals, as you mentioned, Sydney and then Queenscliff and then Williamstown. So I will be kind of around and I'd love to say hi.
Fantastic. Toni, I thoroughly enjoyed reading Dinner with the Schnabels, a bird's eye view into the pressures of modern life and what it means to be a family. Thank you so very much for joining me on Talking Aussie Books today.
Absolute pleasure, Claudine. Thanks.
That's a wrap, folks. If you enjoyed this podcast episode, please drop me a line via my webpage at claudinetinellis.com, via Instagram, Facebook or Twitter. Alternatively, consider leaving a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify or Google Podcasts. Until next time, happy reading!